me on. A couple of them here. There we go. I'm going to talk about repotting Cattleya species tonight. And we talked a little bit about this earlier. This is the one we're going to repot. This is actually Cattleya purpurata. The variety is cinerosa. I looked for this plant for about 15 years. I saw one over in the Baton Rouge Orchid Society show, and it had a bright red lip on it. I wanted it. I found out that a guy in Biloxi, Mississippi brought the plant in. So I made a trip to Biloxi on my way back to talk to him. He told me he would be there, and when I got there was no way in the world he was going to sell me a part of that. So about 7 or 8 years ago, a friend of mine had one that he was in the process of killing. He said, "Here, make it live." So this is what it looks like, and let's go on to the next one. We've talked about some of this while we were chatting. There's two types of cattleyas. There's unifoliate cattleyas, which have one leaf at the top of the pseudobulb, at the apex of the pseudobulb, and there's bifoliate cats, which will have 2 or sometimes 3. Next one. Picture of a unifoliate cat. On to the next one. Picture of a bifoliate cat. On to the next one. Before I go on from here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between them. Most unifoliate cats have a good, healthy-sized pseudobulb where they store nutrients and liquids. So you have a little bit of flexibility in terms of when you repot, because they've got enough sustenance in that pseudobulb that they can survive for a while. Bifoliate cats, on the other hand, have a tendency to be long and thin. And since they have less capability of storing nutrients, they're somewhat temperamental. Kind of like a teenage girl that just broke up with her boyfriend. Nothing good is going to happen for a while. So you've got to be a little more careful repotting the bifoliate cats. Now, why do we repot? There's really only 2 reasons. The mix has broken down and it's turned to mush, or the plant has outgrown the pot. Now, I know some people who never repot. They will grow that plant in that mix until it rots. It will rot the roots. The plant will go limp, and they'll think, "Oh, I've got to water it some more." So they water it more, and it will get even limper. And they'll think, "Oh, gee, it's not getting enough water," so they'll water it more, and before you know it, the plant is dead. So they throw it out, and they go and buy another one. The only other person I know that never repots their cats is the person who doesn't grow them in any mix. No mix. No mix. Why put it in mix? How do they grow in nature? Hanging on trees, hanging on brush, growing on rock faces. No mix. And if you've got a big enough container or you want to hang it on a tree, you don't ever have to repot that thing. But typically what happens is the plant will eventually grow out of the container that you have put it in. And many growers will tell you that the best bloom you get is the first one over the edge of the pot. Anybody know why? Because the roots are growing free on the outside of the pot, and that's as close as we can come to replicating conditions in the wild. That's the way they like to grow. So your plant will actually look best, the flower will look best on that first growth out of the pot. But The next one is going to hang down, or it's going to grow sideways, or something funky is going to happen. So we're going to have to get it out of that pot into a new one. Next one. Now there's a couple of variables to consider. Some plants root before they bloom, and some plants root after they bloom. Next one. Why is that important? Because we want to repot before those root tips get so long that we break them off. We want to get the new roots into the mix so they'll establish quickly, because that will stabilize the plant and it won't rock back and forth. If the plant rocks back and forth in the medium, you'll get scar tissue on the roots. If you get scar tissue on the roots, it won't absorb water, it won't absorb nutrients, and it's on its way to dying. Next one. This is when you want to repot. Those roots are maybe 1/4 of an inch long. There's one root that's a little bit longer than that. This one really should have been repotted the week before. But the week before was Christmas week, and I was busy doing other things with the family, and I didn't get around to repotting it until New Year's weekend. And the roots were a little bit too long then, but it still was short enough that it was okay. Okay, next one. The best time is before the root tips emerge. Now, I'm sure all of you keep records of your plants, right? Okay, does anybody keep records of their plants? I keep a record of every plant I have, and I've talked to people, and I ask the question all the time, what do you put in your record? What is in your database? And the most common thing I get is the color of the plant. Well, duh. The name of the plant is Pink Dragon. What color do you think it's going to be? Purple, right. Some people put in there when the plant blooms. That's good. Some people put in there when they repotted it. Some people put in there what they've put the mix that it's in, how big the pot is, who they bought the plant from, how much they paid for it. But they missed the most important thing, or at least the most important thing to me. When does it root? Now remember earlier I said, if you do for all of your plants what I'm suggesting you do for the bifoliate cats, you won't get in any trouble. And that is, if you know when that plant is going to root, you know that plant roots the first week in February, this is a good week to repot it. Because next week the roots will pop out and you will have it in the new mix before you have the chance to break them off. Anybody ever broken new roots off a plant repotting it? Okay, you've lost that root. If you can pot them before the root tips emerge, you are way ahead of the game. If you can repot them when they're 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch long, like the ones that I showed you in that picture, that's okay. If they're already an inch long or so, best thing you can do is wait until next year, because you're running a risk that you're going to break them off or you're going to abrade them. Something bad is going to happen. Next one. Now here's a table. Overall, there's about 100 different Cattleya species today. This is after they've brought all the Sophronitis into Cattleya, after they've taken a lot of the Laelias and turned them into Cattleyas. There were about 60 traditional Cattleyas. They've added about 40 more. I've picked some of the most common ones here, and I see that I can't spell Persiliana very well. This is called Fat Fingers. I picked the most common ones that we typically grow. And I've showed you when the blooming season is for those plants. Now, these are the ones that will root before they bloom. So when they begin putting up their new growth in February, in March, in April, whenever it happens to be, that's the time you want to repot this particular group of plants. Your Germanias, your Labatas, your Maximas, your Trianias, you get them as soon as they're beginning to put out new growth. Now, do any of you subscribe to the theory that everything should be repotted in spring? Well, the people who subscribe to that theory are the people who in the past have killed everything that shouldn't be repotted in spring, because there were no roots, and there weren't going to be any roots for 6 months. But these are the ones that typically you repot as soon as you begin seeing the new growth. Next one. These are the unifoliates that root after they bloom. So as soon as they have bloomed, they're going to bloom from new growth that has no roots. And as soon as those blooms drop off, it's safe to go out and repot them, because they will be putting out roots within a couple of weeks. They'll rest for a couple of weeks, then they'll put out the roots. So with your Lutemannias, the typical Lutemannia blooms in March. There's another variety that blooms in late fall. That one is a little different, but the one in March blooms in March. April 1st, you can go out and you can repot that, and you're going to have roots within a matter of a couple of weeks. Next one. The bifoliate cats. Same thing. These are the ones that root before they bloom. These are the ones that, as soon as they begin putting up the new growth, you can safely repot them, because those roots will drop into the mix within a couple of weeks, and you're not going to stress that plant any more than you have to. And again, these are the most common ones. Again, I see I spelled Beringiana right there. Sorry about that. Yeah, you know, I don't care whether you get over it or not, because I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, next one. What's that? I was trying to figure out how to pronounce it. Well, yeah, I'd go back and try Amethysta glossa then. Okay, these are the bifoliates that root after they bloom. These are the ones, as soon as the blooms fall off, wait 2 weeks, let them rest, and then you can go out and repot them, because they have bloomed off of a growth that has no roots on it. And shortly after they come out of their rest period, they'll drop roots into the mix. Okay. These are the funky ones, the oddballs. And the first two, Eclondii and Violetia, will put up multiple growths during the year. They'll put up a new growth, it'll bloom. They'll put up another new growth, it'll bloom. They'll put up another new growth, it'll bloom. They may do this 3 or 4 times during the course of the summer. And as soon as each one of those new growths bloom, it's safe to repot them, because they'll put out the roots from the growth right after the bloom season. And I always like to do it on the first bloom of the year, because then I can get new roots into the mix. I can stabilize the pot quickly, and whatever happens after that is just going to drop into the mix anyway. I don't have to do anything to it. The bottom two, Rockeriana and Nobiliar, are a little bit different. Anybody grow them? Okay. You know what you call the plants of that type group? Rhizothoids. Because the growth that will put out the new blooms grows off of the rhizome. And you will get a growth coming off, it will put up a bloom, And then you will get another growth off of the bloom growth that will become your new foliar growth. Following that? Yeah, okay. You got a pseudobulb, something will come shooting off of it. You'll get a bloom on that. Then something will shoot off of that bloom spike, and that will become the foliar growth. And when that foliar growth comes out, that's when you repot, because that's when the new roots are going to come along. Now, ideally with Walkeriana and Nobilior, you're not going to repot them anyway. You're either going to put them in a basket or you're going to put them in a mount, because they like free air movement around their roots, and they do best on a mount or in a basket. Next one. Now we get down to the nitty-gritty of it. How do we do this? And here we're going to run into a little controversy. This is the old plant before I tore it apart. Next one. The first thing I did is went in, and see where the dot is up there? I removed those old dead back bulbs with a clipper. And I use a pretty good sized clipper for this because I had to cut the rhizome. Now, I'm sure you all sterilize your cutting tools before you use them, right? Anybody not? And I know a lot of people who don't. You sometimes forget. You're sometimes running a risk then. You should sterilize them before you work on a plant. And then you can use that cutter as many times on the plant as you want, but sterilize before you start working, particularly if it's a valued plant. And this is a valued plant. This is one I told you I looked for years. I'm not going to take any risks with this. There's two things you can sterilize with. The best one is a torch. Just take a torch, 10 seconds or so on each side of the blade, get it good and hot, and then you can make as many cuts as you want. The downside to repotting with a torch is I had a tendency after I was done to stick the torch in my back pocket. And if anybody would like to come up after the meeting with a $20 bill, I'll show you the brand. The other thing you can sterilize with is trisodium phosphate, concrete cleaner. If you can find the real thing. You've got to find the trisodium phosphate with phosphorus in it, because that's what kills the bacteria and the virus. If you get the TSP substitute, you may as well put it in your coffee to sweeten it, because it's not going to kill anything. Okay, we removed the dead back bulbs. We got them out of there. Next slide. Now it's time to go to work on the roots. All of these roots are dead. Now, there's a couple ways to find out what's live and what's dead. One way to do that is to take the plant out of the pot today, soak it in water. What turns white or green is live. What doesn't is dead. And then tomorrow, after they've dried, you can go back and you can clip the dead ones off. Now for this, I use a different cutter. I use something that's a finer cutter, more like a scissors, because I'm not cutting through a big mass. But again, sterilized the same way. You have to let them dry. You know, you ask 3 different people, you're going to get a bunch of different answers. You probably don't have to. I like to, and I'll tell you why I like to. If it's wet, whether it's the pseudobulb, whether it's the root, if it's wet and it's live, you have the possibility that you're going to get disease or fungus or bacteria backing into the plant through the cut. So that's why I like to do it dry. And after I repot a plant, after I've made any cuts on the plant, I typically don't water it for 3 or 4 days. Again, the reason for that is I want scar tissue to form on the cut to protect it. Now, some people use hydrogen peroxide on them. Some people use cinnamon, particularly the people who like to lick their fingers while they're potting plants.
Don't judge me.
You know who you are, huh? Okay. Again, this is one, folks, there's no right or wrong answer. There's just a lot of different ways to do it, and what you're hearing is my way. This is the way I do it. Okay, next one. Now we're going to go in and we're going to remove the dry sheath, and we were talking about this a little while ago. This is that coating on the pseudobulb. And this is an ideal time to repot it because you got it out of the plant, you can manipulate it, you can maneuver it. I take a piece of, I use cotton swabs, little cotton pads. My wife uses them to remove makeup. I use them to remove deuterius from plant pseudobulbs. Get them wet, rub them down. Some people rub them down with alcohol, some people just use water. But it's a good way to clean them off real quick, real easy. Okay, next one. Now we get into the controversy. We add base to the pot for drainage. We pick a pot where we can get about 2 years growth without having to repot it. And then we put something in the base of the pot for drainage and for stability. A lot of people use packing peanuts, styrofoam peanuts. I'm potting plants here that get 2 feet tall, and I'm putting them in a 4-inch or a 5-inch pot. So I want something that's going to give me a little bit of weight and a little bit of stability in the bottom of that pot. So I use lava rock. And I have got a very good grower down in Sarasota who goes absolutely ape crazy when I say I use lava rock. She says, you can't do that because it builds up salt from your fertilizer and you'll kill your plants. Well, Kathy happens to be growing in a greenhouse where she does build up salt if she uses lava rock, but I'm growing outside. And you know something? Every time it rains, the salts wash out. So I can use the heavy lava rock to stabilize that pot so it doesn't tip over, and I don't have to worry about salt built up. Again, this is one of those controversial things I do. I wouldn't recommend everyone do it, but I would recommend you get something heavy and porous in the bottom of that pot so that it doesn't, a big plant doesn't tip over. Peanuts you can use for a small plant, something big, get something a little heavier. Next one. Now we get to the new root tips on the far left. You see them there? They're green tips with white. Again, these are a little bit longer than I like them, but this is when I got to the plant. And I've trimmed all of the dead roots away. There's a couple there that I don't know whether they're dead or not. I started at the end of that root, particularly the one that's hanging forward over the end of the bench, and I clipped it. And it was dry. So I went up about 1.5 inches and I clipped it again. And it was still dry. So I went up another 1.5 inches or 2 inches and I clipped it again. And at that point, maybe it was dry, maybe there was a little green there. So I decided, okay, I'm going to leave it that length. We'll see what happens. But that's what you want when you get your new root tips, because that's what you want to bury in the medium. Okay, next one. Now we add medium, and then we add a pot clip. Now when you repot a cattleya, you want to basically get it to the point where it is laying on the top of the medium. You want the rhizome to be laying on the top. You don't want it buried. Now when I say rhizome, does everybody know what I'm talking about? Anybody want to know? Did I hear no? Okay. The rhizome is the connector between the pseudobulbs. A rhizome is a technical term. I don't know if you want to use a technical term or if you just want to say that thingy bob that connects those things that go up. It's okay. But you want that laying on top of the medium because you don't want that buried. You don't want it to rot. And that's what pot clips are for. If you paid $30 or $50 or $75 for that plant, you would like it to survive. You don't want it rocking back and forth so that the roots are abrading, so you use a 25-cent pot clip on it. And you put that pot clip across the rhizome. Maybe you have to use 2, maybe you have to use 3 to stabilize it, but that's a whole lot cheaper than buying a new plant. Now notice the mix I'm using there. That is called Aliflor or Hydrotone. Yeah, it's got a bunch of different names, but I like them. They're clay pellets. I like them because I'm growing outside, as I said, and if it rains, 30 minutes after it's done raining, that stuff is going to start drying. It's going to drain quickly because there's space between it. There's air movement there. It's going to be drained and it's going to dry. I get them online. You can get them in a hydroponic store, place of hydroponic growing. I buy them on Amazon.
You can also get them at reptile stores.
Okay, reptile stores. All right.
Because they're used in terrarium making as a drainage layer. They're actually really good as a drainage layer.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. Drainage is the secret to these things because the water will drain out of them. You're going to soak these things, and they're not going to retain the moisture. The roots are going to retain the moisture. They're going to dry, so there will be nothing down there that rots the roots of your plant.
They don't harbor bacteria.
And that, well, yeah, they do. You got to be careful. They will harbor. Not as bad because they don't stay wet. But you got to be careful of anything harboring bacteria. Since I'm growing outside, I like this. If you're growing in a greenhouse, maybe you want to use bark. The only thing I don't recommend ever using is sphagnum, because sphagnum is going to, that's a root rotter if I ever saw one. But I use this, and again, I've been doing this for 25 plus years. I started out using bark. Then I got with Rob Schneider from Odom's Orchids in Fort Pierce, and Rob was using a product called Stay-Lite, which is crushed shale. And we got to talking, and he plants everything in it. And I said, what about oncidiums and things like that with real fine roots? He said, yeah, I use shale. So I tried it, and it worked really well. The downside to the shale is since it's crushed shale, it has sharp edges. And it can break the root tips. It can abrade the root tips. So then I switched to the Hydrotone or Aliflor because it's round, it's smooth, it doesn't break the root tips. The risk you run with this a little bit, again, if you're growing inside, is it will, since it's clay and it's porous, it will hold the fertilizer salts a little bit. So if you're growing inside, you would have to flush it, which is why I think a lot of people who grow inside don't use it. This is my personal preference. I'm doing a program, so you get my personal preference tonight. Okay, next one. Don't forget the tag. How many do you have that are nice pink cattleyas? Have no idea what it is. Yeah, we all have a few of those. I have a few more after the last hurricane than I thought I did. So make a tag, and my suggestion is you make 2 tags. Tags are relatively cheap. Make a small one, put it in the bottom of the pot. Squirrels very seldom dig to the bottom of the pot. The wind doesn't blow it out of the bottom of the pot. So when the next hurricane comes along and blows the one out of the top of the pot, you'll still have the one at the bottom. When you repot, you'll know what the plant is. Don't use a permanent marker. A permanent marker in Florida weather is about 3 months worth. I have a friend who, he's not a friend. He's a person I know. Let's clarify this real quickly. He is a person I know who is prone to posting misinformation on Florida Orchid Growers Group. He spent $3,300 for a labeler. The labels cost $3 a piece. And a couple of my associates were over looking at his collection, and they said, you know, the labels look real nice. They would look much better if they weren't on the floor of his lanai and were actually stuck in the pot. He also didn't get the labeler with spell checker on it because the first one they looked at had something spelled wrong on it. Another friend of mine got the $30 labeler. Works just as well. He said it goes very slowly. I was kidding him and I said, Randy, I got a new labeling system too. It's a number 2 lead pencil and a can of matte spray from Krylon. I bought 500 tags. I got a deal on them. I got 500 tags for $3. Got the tags in the mail, looked at them, and there was no matte surface on them. They were shiny on both sides. Hence, we bought the can of Krylon matte spray, clear matte spray, and we sprayed the tags. Then we turned them over after they dried, and we sprayed the other side. Then I could take my number 2 lead pencil, and I could write the name of the plant on the tag, and it will stay there for 3 or 4 years. And the one in the bottom of the pot will stay until I repot it. I had a friend who sat through one of my culture classes for years, and Al was about as respectful as I am. He said, anybody who sits through your class, Roy, is going to be exposed to neither culture nor class. And I accused him of playing golf only so he could steal number 2 lead pencils off the golf carts and make his plant tags. Tags are important. Use them. And you can put all sorts of information on there. I've got the name of the plant on there. I've got the number of the plant. It goes into my database. I've got the date I repotted it. And I've also got the date that it roots on there. No, I don't have the color on. I know I can see what color it is. Okay, next one. The end. That is Cattleya cinerosa, Purpurata variety cinerosa. Okay, any questions? Going once?
Does it smell like cinnamon and roses?
Does it smell like cinnamon and roses? No, it doesn't smell. Most purpuratas don't even smell. This is one of the old Brazilian Laelias that they decided should be a Laelia because it had 8 pollinia.
We appreciate Roy coming down.
What's that?